The day was coming near, and I was sitting alone in my apartment, still in my dress blues, the fabric tight across my shoulders like it was holding me upright out of habit. Dawn hadn't fully broken yet. The city outside was quiet in that early morning way where even regret hasn't woken up. My right knee throbbed, the same dull ache I'd carried since the fall outside Mosul, but this time it wasn't pain that had me frozen. It was the mark on my face, faint but undeniable, burning under the bathroom light. The slap had landed hours ago, and it was already being rewritten. I stood in front of the mirror, fingers brushing my jaw, smelling faintly of gun oil, starch, and old coffee. The metal case sat unopened on the kitchen counter behind me, its weight pulling at my thoughts like gravity. It didn't feel like honor. It felt like evidence, something that could be twisted, dismissed, or turned against me depending on who told the story first. My phone buzzed on the sink. Not a congratulatory message. Not from the unit. It was a family group chat notification. And that's when I knew. I'm Ethan Walker. I'm 32 years old, and I've spent more than a decade learning how silence can be louder than gunfire. The message wasn't from my mother. It wasn't from my sister. It was from Mark Reynolds, my stepfather. I won't tolerate disrespect in my house. You came in angry, aggressive, and scared your mother. I defended myself. I stared at the screen, my reflection splitting into two versions of me. The one in uniform, spine straight, jaw set, and the one standing in Mark's living room hours earlier, unarmed, exhausted, asking a simple question about why my name had been left off a property document. Defended himself. My hand tightened around the phone. The skin under my jaw pulsed again, as if my body was reminding me of the truth before I could talk myself out of it. It hadn't been a fight. There had been no shouting, no threats, just one sharp, open-handed strike when I refused to lower my voice. And now, according to Mark, it was my fault. The memory replayed without permission. The living room smelled like lemon cleaner and old leather. The TV was muted, some morning news anchor moving her mouth without sound. My mother sat rigid on the couch, eyes locked on her hands. I had asked Mark, calmly, why the paperwork showed his name alone. He smiled first. Then he sighed. Then he stepped closer. "You think that uniform makes you better than me?" he'd asked. I didn't answer fast enough. That's when his hand came across my face. Back in my apartment, the phone buzzed again. This time, a new name appeared beneath Mark's message. Rachel Walker, my sister. "Ethan, why do you always bring drama home?" Drama. I leaned back against the sink, tile cold through the fabric of my uniform. Somewhere across the country, my unit was preparing for a ceremony that would be recorded, archived, stamped into public record. Somewhere, my commanding officer was rehearsing my name with quiet precision, and here I was, being turned into the monster before breakfast. I didn't reply. Instead, I reached for the metal case and finally opened it. The ribbon caught the light. Perfect. Unbent. Untouched. Outside, the sun finally broke the horizon. Inside, something in me went completely still. If this story already feels uncomfortably familiar, take a second, subscribe to Betrayal Feud for more stories like this, and comment below telling me where you're listening from.
I didn't join the army because I wanted medals. I joined because I needed a system that made sense, one where effort led to outcome, where rules were written down, where silence didn't automatically mean guilt. By 21, I was already tired of the soft chaos of home, the way conversations curved around Mark Reynolds instead of through him, the way my mother learned to shrink her sentences to keep the peace. So I chose structure, I became an Army Staff Sergeant, infantry, later reassigned into a joint operations role that lived in the margins. Coordination, reconnaissance, long hours of waiting punctuated by moments that demanded absolute precision. It wasn't glamorous. It was a job where mistakes didn't trend on social media. They just followed you home in your sleep. I was good at it. Not loud good, not movie good. Quiet good. The kind where officers stopped explaining things halfway through because they knew you already understood. The kind where your name came up in rooms you weren't invited into. The kind where your reward was more responsibility and less sleep. Back home, none of that translated. To my family, I was still the same kid who left at 18 with a duffel bag and too many opinions. Mark especially never let me forget that. He liked to say things like, "The military just teaches you how to take orders," or "Out there you're a number, in here you're still just a son." Except I wasn't his son. That distinction mattered to me. It never mattered to him. The first time I came home on leave after my initial deployment, I noticed the drawer. It was a small thing, one of those kitchen drawers everyone pretends not to have. Junk mail, spare keys, old chargers. Before I left, my birth certificate and social security card had been there. My mother kept them safe. When I asked for them, she hesitated. Mark answered instead. "Oh, I reorganized," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Didn't see the need to keep all that old stuff." It took 3 days to get them back. That was the pattern. Not open hostility, rearrangement. Every time I returned, something was subtly different. My room became a storage space. My old photos disappeared. Conversations paused when I entered, then resumed with less detail once I sat down. When I talked about my work, Mark redirected. "So anyway, property taxes are going up again." As if what I did existed in a separate, less relevant universe. Rachel followed his lead without meaning to. She loved me, I know that, but love in that house meant staying neutral. My mother lived in the middle, permanently exhausted, and I learned to compartmentalize them the same way I compartmentalized everything else. The mission that led to the medal wasn't heroic in the cinematic sense. There was no flag-raising moment, no last-second charge. It was a series of decisions under bad information, worse timing, and the understanding that if I hesitated, someone else would pay for it. We were operating near a corridor that intelligence insisted was mostly inactive. It wasn't. A convoy got pinned down. Comms were fractured. I took control of coordination, rerouted air support, adjusted extraction points, physically moved a wounded specialist under fire when the assigned medic went down. It lasted 14 minutes. 14 minutes that stretched into something elastic and endless. Afterwards, no one said much. We cleaned weapons, we filed reports, we went back to work. 3 weeks later, my commanding officer called me into his office. No preamble, no build-up. "Walker," he said, sliding a folder across the desk, "you probably won't like the attention, but this is happening." Inside was the awards package, commendation, language I didn't recognize myself in, phrases like exceptional composure and decisive leadership, statements that felt too clean for what had actually happened. I nodded, thanked him, and asked if I could return to duty. That night, lying in my bunk, I thought about telling my family. Not for praise, not even for understanding, just inclusion. I imagined calling my mother, letting her hear that her son had done something right, something solid, something that would exist on paper long after arguments faded. I imagined Rachel sending a heart emoji. I imagined Mark saying nothing, which would have been fine. I waited a week before reaching out. When I finally did, it wasn't dramatic, just a text. "Hey, I'm getting a commendation next month. There'll be a small ceremony. I wanted you to know." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. My mother replied an hour later, "That's nice, honey. Just be careful." That was it. No questions, no curiosity, no acknowledgement of what it meant. Rachel sent a thumbs-up emoji. Mark didn't respond at all. I told myself not to care. I'd trained myself for that. Caring was a luxury item. You carried it only when conditions allowed. But somewhere between pressing my uniform that morning and polishing boots until I could see my face in them, something shifted. Not anger, clarity. I realized I was speaking a language they never intended to learn. The slap came later, on what should have been an ordinary visit home before the ceremony. I'd asked about the property because my name had been on earlier drafts, because promises had been made casually over dinners and holidays, in that way families make commitments without paperwork. Mark framed it as entitlement. You're never here, you don't contribute. I reminded him, calmly, that I sent money every month. That's different. That's duty. This is family. When I said my service was the reason I wasn't there, his face changed. That's when he stepped closer. That's when his hand moved. Afterwards, my mother cried silently. Rachel stared at her phone. Mark rewrote the moment before my cheek stopped stinging. And I left. Back in my apartment now, hours before the ceremony, I didn't replay the slap anymore. I replayed the smaller moments. The drawer, the deflections, the way my news always landed like background noise. I stopped drafting messages in my head. I stopped preparing explanations they hadn't asked for. Instead, I laid my uniform out with deliberate care. Not for them, for me.
The morning of the ceremony arrived without ceremony. No swelling music, no dramatic phone calls, just the quiet efficiency the Army excels at. Wake-up times posted on a board, boots aligned beneath bunks, the low murmur of men and women who understood that significance didn't require noise. I pressed my uniform in silence. Each crease felt like a decision I wasn't explaining anymore. The phone stayed face down on the desk. I didn't check for messages. I already knew what wouldn't be there. No apology from Mark, no follow-up from my mother, no good luck or we're proud of you from Rachel. Their absence had weight now. No longer sharp, just dense. On the drive to the base auditorium, the radio played something forgettable. I passed the same stretch of road I'd driven hundreds of times. The gate guards waved me through after a glance at my ID, their professionalism automatic, impersonal, clean. Inside the auditorium, the air smelled faintly of polish and recycled air. Rows of chairs, a small stage, flags positioned with mathematical precision. This wasn't a place built for emotion. It was built for record. I took my seat among the other recipients. Some fidgeted, some joked quietly. One lieutenant stared straight ahead, jaw locked, like he was bracing for impact that would never come. I felt calm. That surprised me. I'd imagined anger showing up late, demanding attention. Instead, there was a settling, like dust after a door closes. When my name was called, Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker, I stood without thinking. My body moved before my mind could catch up, muscle memory perfected by repetition. I crossed the stage, saluted, accepted the medal. The colonel read the citation aloud, voice steady, practiced. For exceptional composure under fire and decisive leadership that directly contributed to the safe extraction of Allied personnel. The words floated past me, detached from the night they described. Cameras clicked softly. Somewhere in the back, someone cleared their throat. It was over in under 30 seconds. No swelling applause, just respectful acknowledgement. And that was enough. Later that afternoon, a short video clip was uploaded to the base's official page, a standard thing. Names tagged, faces clear, time-stamped, archived in a system that didn't care about family politics or rewritten narratives. I didn't share it. I didn't send links. I went back to work. That night, my mother finally called. Her voice was cautious, like she was approaching an animal she wasn't sure remembered being fed. "Ethan," she said, "Mark told me you left very upset." I closed my eyes. "He slapped me," I said. A pause. "He said you were yelling." I wasn't. Another pause, longer this time. "Well," she said carefully, "you know how he is. He felt threatened." Threatened by his wife's son in uniform asking a question. "I have a ceremony tomorrow, or I guess today. It already happened." "Oh," she replied, "that's nice." Same word, same tone. Nice. Rachel texted later. "Mom's really stressed. Maybe you could apologize just to keep things calm." I stared at the screen until the screen dimmed. This was the dismissal. Not loud, not cruel, just endlessly minimizing. My service became context instead of substance. My pain became inconvenience. The slap became a misunderstanding. And something inside me finally clicked into place. I stopped explaining, not as punishment, as preservation. The following days passed in clean lines: work, training, reports, conversations that stayed within safe parameters. When my unit congratulated me, I thanked them. When my commanding officer nodded at me in passing, I returned it. I didn't bring my family up again. The reckoning wasn't explosive, it was surgical. I realized I had been waiting for a recognition they weren't equipped to give. I'd been translating my life into smaller words so it wouldn't intimidate them. I'd been absorbing blame to maintain access. That wasn't love. That was labor. 2 weeks later, the video crossed the invisible boundary I hadn't anticipated. A former high school classmate, someone who followed the base page, shared it publicly, tagged me, added a caption. "Proud of this guy, from our hometown to this." The algorithm did the rest. Likes, shares, comments from people I hadn't spoken to in years, veterans chiming in, old teachers recognizing the name, strangers thanking me for my service in language that felt both excessive and sincere. I didn't engage, but my family saw it. I know they did because my phone lit up the next morning. Multiple messages. My mother first. "Why didn't you tell us it was this serious?" Rachel next. "I had no idea. The video's everywhere." And finally, Mark. Just one sentence. "You could have handled this differently." I read it once, then put the phone down. No response, no clarification, no defense. Because the record already existed. It didn't need my help. That night, sitting alone again, I replayed the ceremony, not for validation, but for grounding. The simplicity of it, the way no one needed to be convinced, the way truth, once documented, didn't argue back. I understood then that silence wasn't always surrender. Sometimes it was alignment.
The first thing my mother did when the video found her wasn't call me. She watched it again. I know this because weeks later she admitted it quietly, like a confession that didn't expect forgiveness. She said she replayed the moment where my name was read, where I stepped forward without hesitation, where the colonel shook my hand like it meant something beyond the gesture itself. She said she didn't recognize my face at first. That detail stayed with me. Recognition, I learned, isn't automatic. Sometimes it arrives late, wearing guilt instead of pride. The collision didn't happen all at once. It came in fragments, screenshots sent by distant relatives, awkward messages forwarded by Rachel, a neighbor congratulating my mother at the grocery store before she'd processed what there was to congratulate. Public record has a way of stripping away private edits. My mother called 3 days after the video started circulating outside our orbit. Her voice was softer than usual, not kinder, just uncertain. "Why didn't you explain what this meant?" she asked. I was sitting at my kitchen table, boots off, uniform hung neatly by the door. The medal was back in its case, stored in a drawer that closed all the way this time. "I did," I said, just not loudly. She sighed. "We didn't know." That sentence carried decades of work behind it.
You didn't know because you didn't ask. You didn't know because knowing would have required choosing. Rachel reached out next, in her usual careful way. I wish I'd understood sooner. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed again. What I sent instead was simple. Understanding sooner wouldn't have changed what happened. She didn't respond. Mark waited longer. When he finally texted, it wasn't an apology. It was an explanation disguised as one. I never meant to minimize what you do. I just don't like being made to feel small in my own house. There it was. Not regret for the slap, not accountability for the lie, just discomfort. I read it without anger, without satisfaction. The clarity from weeks earlier held steady. I'm not trying to make you feel anything. I'm just living my life. That was the last direct exchange we had. The aftermath wasn't cinematic. There was no confrontation scene, no raised voices, no cathartic breakdown where everyone suddenly spoke truth fluently. Instead, there were invitations that came with new caution. Come by if you're free, instead of, why don't you visit more? Questions asked tentatively, compliments offered sideways. They adjusted, but only as much as they had to. And I adjusted in return. I stopped rearranging myself to fit into rooms that hadn't been built with me in mind. When I visited, I stayed shorter. When conversations turned dismissive, I didn't argue. When silence arrived, I let it stay. Peace, I learned, isn't the absence of conflict. It's the absence of self-betrayal. One evening, months later, I stood in my apartment again, civilian clothes this time, window open, city noise filtering in, the same mirror, the same sink, no mark on my jaw now, just memory. I thought about that morning after the slap, the way I'd stood there in uniform, trying to decide whether truth needed witnesses to exist. It didn't. The Army had already taught me that integrity isn't loud. It doesn't chase acknowledgement. It holds its shape whether anyone's watching or not. Family, I realized, works the same way. Or it doesn't work at all. I didn't cut them off. I didn't reconcile either. I recalibrated. I stopped waiting for apologies that were never clean. I stopped hoping the video would transform them into people who asked better questions. I let their limitations be theirs. And in doing so, something loosened in me. I slept better. I spoke less defensively. I no longer felt the urge to prove that my service mattered, because I finally understood that the people who needed proof were never the ones who counted. The medal still sits in its case. Sometimes I forget where I put it. That's how I know I'm free. Direct address. If you're listening to this and it feels familiar, if you've ever been diminished at home for becoming something solid elsewhere, if your truth had to become public before it was taken seriously, you're not alone, and you're not wrong for stopping the explanation. Honor doesn't require consensus. Integrity doesn't need applause. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let the record stand on its own and walk forward without looking back. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to Betrayal Feud for more real stories of loyalty, silence, and survival. And comment below to tell us where you're listening from.